Daniel thought his marriage was steady. He worked long hours, paid the bills, and tried to be the dependable husband his wife, Emily, once said she admired. But one Friday evening, Emily's words cut through him like a blade. "It's just one night," she said calmly, as though asking for nothing more than a casual favor. "One night with the man I've always dreamed of, and then I'll come back. You'll understand, right?" Daniel froze, unable to believe what he was hearing. She wasn't joking. Emily picked up her purse, gave him a cold smile, and walked out the door without looking back. Neighbors saw her leave. Friends would soon whisper. But Daniel didn't chase after her. He didn't beg, he didn't cry. Instead, he sat quietly at the kitchen table, his mind racing. Everyone expected him to collapse under the weight of betrayal. But instead, Daniel began planning something no one could have predicted. The silence of the house was deafening, but Daniel's mind was anything but still. He replayed Emily's words over and over, every syllable fueling a storm inside him. Most husbands, he thought, would call friends to vent, or drown themselves in anger and sorrow. But Daniel wasn't like most husbands. Instead, he stood up, walked to his office, and pulled out a notebook. On the first page, he wrote a single word in bold letters: plan. If Emily thought she could leave him humiliated, then walk back into his life as though nothing had happened, she was mistaken. Daniel wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to plead, and wasn't going to sink into despair. He was going to shock her, shock their friends, and shock everyone who thought they knew him. He didn't know exactly how yet, but the spark of determination in his chest grew stronger with each passing minute. And while Emily was out chasing her dream guy, Daniel was setting the stage for something she would never forget. The next morning, Daniel made breakfast for himself in silence. The empty chair across from him seemed to mock him, but instead of feeling broken, he felt strangely focused. He began making calls, not to Emily, but to people she would least expect. Old friends she had brushed off, family members she had kept at a distance, even neighbors who always seemed curious about their marriage. Daniel invited them over for a special dinner the following week. When they asked what the occasion was, he only replied, "You'll see. It's important." Meanwhile, he went through the house with a quiet precision, gathering up everything that belonged to Emily, her clothes, her jewelry, even the framed photos she always insisted stay on the walls. He packed them neatly into boxes and stacked them in the garage. Daniel wasn't rushing. He wasn't acting out of blind rage. This was deliberate. Calculated. By the time Emily returned from her one night, Daniel's home, and his heart, would no longer be the same place she had left. Emily didn't come home that night. Not the next morning either. By the third day, Daniel knew the whispers had already started, friends texting, neighbors watching. He kept calm. He wanted them to. On the fourth evening, just as he expected, Emily finally walked through the door. Her hair was perfect, her perfume heavy, and her expression smug, as if she had just returned from a vacation instead of tearing her marriage apart. "Well," she said, tossing her purse onto the counter, "I hope you weren't too lonely. I told you it was just one night." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her with steady eyes, the same way a chess player studies the board before the final move. Emily laughed nervously. "What? No yelling? No crying? Aren't you going to ask me how it went?" Instead of responding, Daniel calmly pointed toward the garage. "Your things are packed. You can find them there." Her smile vanished. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Daniel said evenly. "I'm not the man you thought I was. And tonight, everyone will see that too." Emily froze, confused. She had no idea that Daniel's plan was already in motion. Emily's eyebrows knit together as she tried to laugh it off. "Daniel, stop being dramatic. I said it was just one night. You'll get over it." But Daniel didn't flinch. "It's not about me getting over it. It's about you thinking I was weak enough to accept it. Before she could reply, the doorbell rang. Emily blinked in surprise. Who's coming here this late? Daniel stood and straightened his shirt. Guests. People who deserve to see the truth. Emily followed him to the door, her confusion deepening when she saw familiar faces, her sister, an old college friend, even their neighbors, stepping inside with curious looks. Each one greeted Daniel warmly, then glanced at Emily with visible unease. What is this? Emily whispered, her voice tightening. Daniel finally turned to her, his voice calm but firm. You wanted your fantasy. You wanted one night. Fine. But now, everyone will know the cost of it. Tonight, you'll see who truly stands beside you, and who doesn't. Emily's face paled as the reality of his words sank in. This wasn't a fight behind closed doors anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The living room slowly filled with people, murmurs bouncing off the walls. Emily stood stiff, trying to mask her panic with a forced smile. Daniel, however, looked composed, almost relieved, as though the weight he had carried for years was finally slipping away. He waited until everyone had settled before speaking. Thank you all for coming, he began. His voice was steady, but it carried an edge that commanded attention. I asked you here tonight because I believe honesty deserves an audience. Emily's head whipped toward him. Daniel. This isn't funny. Sit down, he said quietly, and the firmness in his tone left her no room to argue. Turning back to the guests, Daniel continued, my wife told me she wanted just one night with her so-called dream man. She left, without shame, and returned as if nothing had changed. But everything has. Gasps rippled across the room. Emily's sister covered her mouth, horrified. A neighbor muttered under his breath. Emily tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. You're exaggerating, Daniel. It wasn't like that. Daniel held up his hand, silencing her. No more lies. Tonight, I show you all what kind of woman she really is. And after this, I won't have to say another word. The room grew still, waiting for what Daniel would reveal next. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but everywhere she looked, people avoided her gaze. Her usual confidence was crumbling. Daniel walked over to the small desk by the wall and lifted a folder. While you were gone, Emily, I didn't sit around waiting. I gathered the truth. The receipts. The messages. The pictures. He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, call logs, and hotel receipts. The room went silent as guests leaned forward, reading in disbelief. Emily's sister gasped. Emily, is this real? Emily's face turned pale. She tried to snatch the papers, but Daniel calmly placed his hand on them first. Go ahead, he said coldly. Tell them it's all fake. Look them in the eyes and lie again. Emily's lips trembled. Daniel, you didn't have to do this in front of everyone, that's where you're wrong, Daniel interrupted. I did have to. Because you thought betrayal was something that could be hidden. Tonight, it's no longer hidden. It's exposed. The air was heavy with judgment, and for the first time, Emily realized she had lost control. Emily's composure shattered. She tried to force a laugh, but it came out shaky and desperate. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything, Daniel. It wasn't like that. But the evidence on the table spoke louder than her words. The messages were explicit in intent, the receipts undeniable. Her sister shook her head in disappointment, while neighbors whispered in disbelief. Daniel didn't yell, didn't gloat, he simply folded his arms and let the silence expose her. You said it was just one night, he finally said. But one night was enough to show me the truth. Enough to end everything we built. Emily's eyes darted to the guests, searching for sympathy. But all she found was disappointment and quiet anger. One of the neighbors, an older woman who had known them for years, stood up. Emily, he gave you loyalty and respect. And this is what you did. The shame was unbearable. Emily's lips quivered, but no words came out. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control of the story. Daniel straightened, his voice calm but cutting. Tonight wasn't about humiliating you. It was about freeing myself. Everyone here now knows the truth. And tomorrow, I'll move forward without you. Gasps filled the room as Emily's world collapsed before her eyes. Emily stumbled back a step, her face flushed as tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, please, you don't have to do this. We can fix it. No one has to know. Daniel shook his head slowly. They already do know. That's the point. For too long, I protected your image, made excuses for your coldness, pretended our marriage was stronger than it was. But tonight, the mask came off. Her sister rose to her feet, glaring. Emily, I defended you every time someone questioned your choices. And now I feel like a fool. The neighbors murmured again, some shaking their heads, others watching in stunned silence. Emily's attempts to hold herself together were unraveling. She dropped to her knees in front of Daniel, her voice trembling. I made a mistake. Just one mistake. Please, don't throw everything away because of it. Daniel leaned down so only she could hear, his words sharp as glass. It wasn't one mistake. It was a choice. And the moment you walked out that door, you ended this marriage yourself. He stepped back, letting his words sink in. Emily stayed frozen on the floor, the room's eyes burning into her, realizing for the first time that her power over him, over anyone, was gone. Daniel stood tall, his presence commanding the room. He looked around at the gathered faces, friends, family, neighbors, all silent witnesses to the truth. Tonight, Daniel said clearly, I wanted everyone to see what I've been living with. Not because I want pity, but because I want closure. I'm done being the quiet, loyal husband who gets walked on. From here forward, I live for myself, not for someone who thought I wasn't enough. The guests nodded, some even clapping softly in support. Emily's sister wiped away angry tears, while the older neighbor muttered, Good for you, Daniel. Emily finally rose to her feet, trembling. So what, you're just going to throw me away? After everything? Daniel's eyes didn't waver. You already threw us away. I'm just finishing what you started. He turned toward the front door, opening it wide. The gesture was clear. The room waited in tense silence. Emily's face drained of color as the realization struck, her place in his home, in his life, was over. And everyone there had witnessed the moment her world collapsed. For a long, tense moment, Emily stood frozen in the middle of the room, her eyes darting from the open door to the faces of the guests. No one moved to comfort her. No one spoke up in her defense. Finally, she whispered, You can't be serious. Daniel's voice was calm, steady, almost too steady. I've never been more serious in my life. Walk out that door, Emily. The same way you did when you chose him over me. But this time, don't come back. Emily's lip quivered, but when she turned toward her sister, she found only cold disappointment. Her so-called friends avoided her gaze entirely. The silence of the room was crushing. Daniel, please, she tried one last time, her voice breaking. I thought you'd forgive me. I thought you'd always be here. Daniel shook his head. That's the problem. You counted on me always being here. Tonight, you learned I won't be. Slowly, Emily picked up her purse, her hands trembling. With every step toward the door, the weight of her choices pressed down heavier. She paused at the threshold, waiting for Daniel to stop her. But he didn't. He just stood tall, his eyes unwavering, as the door finally shut behind her. The room exhaled at once. For Daniel, it was the sound of chains breaking. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in years, the house felt lighter. Daniel exhaled slowly, as though he'd been holding his breath for a lifetime. The guests sat in stunned silence, watching him. Finally, the older neighbor spoke. "You did the right thing, son. Some people never find the strength to walk away." Daniel gave a small nod. "I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth in the open. Now, I can finally move forward without the weight of lies." Emily's sister stood, still shaken. I don't know what to say. But thank you for showing me who she really is. I won't defend her anymore." One by one, the guests approached Daniel, offering words of respect, even admiration. What had begun as his darkest moment was turning into something else, something freeing. After they left, Daniel walked through the house alone. The boxes in the garage no longer felt like reminders of loss but symbols of a fresh start. He poured himself a glass of water, sat at the table where Emily had once laughed at him, and for the first time, he smiled. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. The following morning, Daniel woke up to a flood of messages. Word of what had happened had already spread through the community. Some offered sympathy, others admiration, but almost all carried the same message: respect. For years, he had been the quiet man in the background, overshadowed by Emily's confidence and charm. But now people saw him differently: strong, decisive, unwilling to be humiliated. At work, colleagues who had once pitted him now shook his hand with a new kind of acknowledgement. Even his boss pulled him aside. "Tough as it was, Daniel, you showed what real dignity looks like." Meanwhile, Emily tried to call him. Over and over, her number lit up his phone. But Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. For once, her voice no longer had power over him. That evening, Daniel returned home to his quiet house. He looked at the boxes in the garage one last time, then made a decision. He loaded them into his car, drove across town, and left them neatly on Emily's parents' doorstep. No note. No explanation. Just finality. Driving away, he realized something he never thought possible: the man who had once been betrayed was now free. A week later, Daniel hosted another dinner, but this time, it wasn't about exposing betrayal. It was about beginning again. Friends and neighbors gathered, not out of curiosity, but out of genuine support. The same house that once carried the weight of Emily's choices now echoed with laughter, warmth, and encouragement. Daniel stood at the head of the table, raising a glass. "Life doesn't always go as we plan," he said, his voice steady but lighter than ever. "But sometimes, the endings we fear most are the beginnings we need." The room filled with applause, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something pure: peace. As the evening wore on, he looked around at the faces of people who truly cared for him. The whispers of pity had been replaced with admiration. He wasn't the broken husband anymore, he was the man who stood tall when life tried to break him. And though Emily's absence was still noticeable, it no longer hurt. It was simply space for something better, healthier, and real to fill. Daniel smiled to himself, knowing the truth: sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go. And in letting go, he had found freedom. Right behind closed doors anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The living room slowly filled with people, murmurs bouncing off the walls. Emily stood stiff, trying to mask her panic with a forced smile. Daniel, however, looked composed, almost relieved, as though the weight he had carried for years was finally slipping away. He waited until everyone had settled before speaking. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice was steady, but it carried an edge that commanded attention. "I asked you here tonight because I believe honesty deserves an audience." Emily's head whipped toward him. "Daniel! This isn't funny." "Sit down," he said quietly, and the firmness in his tone left her no room to argue. Turning back to the guests, Daniel continued, "My wife told me she wanted just one night with her so-called dream man. She left, without shame, and returned as if nothing had changed. But everything has. Gasps rippled across the room. Emily's sister covered her mouth, horrified. A neighbor muttered under his breath. Emily tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "You're exaggerating, Daniel. It wasn't like that." Daniel held up his hand, silencing her. "No more lies. Tonight, I show you all what kind of woman she really is. And after this, I won't have to say another word." The room grew still, waiting for what Daniel would reveal next. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but everywhere she looked, people avoided her gaze. Her usual confidence was crumbling. Daniel walked over to the small desk by the wall and lifted a folder. "While you were gone, Emily, I didn't sit around waiting. I gathered the truth. The receipts. The messages. The pictures." He placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots, call logs, and hotel receipts. The room went silent as guests leaned forward, reading in disbelief. Emily's sister gasped. "Emily, is this real?" Emily's face turned pale. She tried to snatch the papers, but Daniel calmly placed his hand on them first. "Go ahead," he said coldly. "Tell them it's all fake. Look them in the eyes and lie again." Emily's lips trembled. "Daniel, you didn't have to do this in front of everyone." "That's where you're wrong," Daniel interrupted. "I did have to. Because you thought betrayal was something that could be hidden. Tonight,